The laughter of her twin daughters, Lily and Iris, was the soundtrack to Alara Vance's world. At 7 years old, they were vibrant sparks of identical energy, their sunshine yellow sundresses a blur as they chased each other across the polished deck of the Azure Dreamer. It was day 3 of their much-anticipated Caribbean cruise, a sun-drenched escape Alara had scrimped and saved for, a chance to make memories that would last a lifetime. She just settled them at a brightly colored table in the Kid Zone Cove, a supervised play area bubbling with the squeals of other children, promising to be back in 10 minutes after a quick call to her sister. The call, made from the quieter promenade deck where the signal was stronger, stretched to 15. A small knot of anxiety tightened in Alara's chest as she hurried back. The cove was still a hive of activity, but the 2 splashes of sunshine yellow were gone. Lily? Iris? Her voice, initially light, acquired a sharper edge. A young attendant, barely out of her teens, offered a vague smile. "They were just here, ma'am. Maybe they went to the arts and crafts station?" But they weren't at arts and crafts, or the mini-golf, or the ice cream parlor. The knot in Alara's stomach cinched tighter, stealing her breath. She retraced her steps, her pace quickening, her calls becoming more urgent. Other parents cast sympathetic, then concerned, glances. Within 30 minutes, Alara was a whirlwind of frantic energy, her carefully constructed composure shattering. She found the Kid Zone supervisor, a harried woman named Brenda, whose initial reassurances quickly faded as Alara's panic became infectious. "They wouldn't wander off," Alara insisted, her voice trembling. "Not far. They know the rules." Brenda made a call, then another. Soon, the ship's security chief, a stern-faced man named Captain Valerius, was involved. The Azure Dreamer, a floating city of over 3,000 souls, began a methodical, yet increasingly urgent, search. Announcements crackled over the intercom, first gentle inquiries, then more direct appeals, their smiling school photos flashing on screens throughout the vessel. Alara, accompanied by a stoic security officer, revisited every place they'd been. Their cabin, the Lido-deck pool where they'd splashed that morning, the grand dining room where they'd marveled at the towering dessert buffet the night before. Each empty space, each unseeing face, was a fresh stab of terror. Hours bled into a nightmarish eternity. The ship implemented Code Adam, a protocol for missing children. Staff fanned out, checking every public area, every unlocked cabin, every shadowy utility corridor. Passengers were asked to check their own staterooms. The vastness of the ship, once a source of wonder, now felt like a malevolent labyrinth designed to swallow her children whole. Captain Valerius, his face etched with grim lines, reviewed security footage. There they were, Lily and Iris, giggling by the splash pad near the Kid Zone entrance. A magician, part of the ship's entertainment crew, performed a few impromptu tricks for a small crowd of children, Lily and Iris among them, their faces rapt with delight. Then, as the small crowd dispersed, the twins seemed to vanish. One moment they were visible at the edge of the frame, partially obscured by a decorative palm. The next, they were gone. There were blind spots, of course, areas the cameras didn't quite reach. One such spot was a narrow service corridor leading away from that section of the Kid Zone. "Could they have gone down there?" Alara whispered, clutching the grainy still image. "It's possible, ma'am," Valerius said, his voice carefully neutral. "But it's a restricted area. They'd have no reason to." By dawn, as the Azure Dreamer docked in Nassau, the Bahamian authorities and the FBI were alerted. The ship became a crime scene. Passengers were interviewed, their disembarkation delayed, frustration mounting amongst them. Whispers circulated. Had they fallen overboard? Been snatched by another passenger? Had a crew member been involved? Alara felt like a ghost, drifting through the chaos. She answered the same questions 100 times, her voice a hoarse echo of itself. The FBI agent assigned to her, a compassionate woman named Special Agent Davies, tried to offer comfort, but there was none to be had. Her babies, her vibrant, laughing girls, had been plucked from the heart of this floating fortress, as if by an unseen hand. The days that followed were a blur of official procedures, sterile interview rooms, and the crushing weight of helplessness. The cruise line offered their deepest sympathies and a private jet to fly her home to Charleston once the initial investigation on board concluded. Home. The word felt alien. How could she return to their brightly decorated bedroom, their toys, their clothes, without them? The investigation, extensive as it was, yielded nothing. No ransom demand, no credible sightings. The magician, a cheerful Filipino man named Rico, was questioned extensively. He remembered the twins, their bright smiles, but insisted he'd lost sight of them with the other children when his brief performance ended. His alibi for the subsequent hours checked out. Every crew member, every passenger with even a hint of a questionable background was scrutinized. Nothing. As Alara finally stepped off the Azure Dreamer and onto Bahamian soil, the tropical heat felt oppressive, the vibrant colors of Nassau, a cruel mockery of the darkness that had enveloped her life. The ship, once a symbol of joy and adventure, now loomed behind her like a steel behemoth, a silent, uncaring witness to the moment her world had fractured. Lily and Iris were gone, swallowed by an azure abyss of uncertainty, leaving behind only a chilling, echoing silence. The Charleston house, once filled with the exuberant chaos of 7-year-old twins, now echoed with a profound, suffocating silence. 10 months had passed since Lily and Iris vanished from the Azure Dreamer. 10 months of Alara Vance existing in a purgatory of hope and despair, a relentless cycle that frayed her nerves and hollowed her eyes. The vibrant pinks and purples of the twins' shared bedroom remained untouched, a shrine to their stolen childhood. Stuffed animals sat expectantly on neatly made beds. Crayon drawings were still taped to the walls, their tiny shoes lined up by the door. Ilara would sometimes sit on the floor in the middle of the room, surrounded by their things, inhaling the faint, lingering scent of baby powder and something uniquely them, and weep until exhaustion claimed her. Missing person flyers, their smiling faces a constant, painful reminder, were plastered on her refrigerator, her coffee table, and in the window of her car. Detective Marcus Thorne, a veteran with the Charleston PD assigned to liaise with the FBI, became a regular if somber presence in her life. He was a man of few words, his face a mask of professional concern, but Ilara sensed a genuine empathy beneath the surface. He never offered false hope, only a quiet assurance that they weren't giving up. "Any news, detective?" she'd ask each time he called or visited, her voice a thin thread of hope. And each time, the answer was a variation of the same. "We're pursuing a few leads, Mrs. Vance. Nothing concrete yet, but we're still looking." The initial media frenzy had died down, replaced by sporadic anniversary pieces that rehashed the baffling disappearance. Theories abounded online: a tragic accident overboard, a meticulously planned abduction by a passenger, even wilder speculations involving trafficking rings or disgruntled crew. The cruise line, Oceanic Voyager Cruises, had settled a substantial, undisclosed sum with Alara, an implicit admission of a security failure, though they publicly maintained their protocols were industry-leading. The money sat untouched in an account, blood money she couldn't bring herself to spend. Ilara had quit her job as a graphic designer. Concentration was impossible. Sleep offered little respite, haunted by dreams of her daughters calling out to her, their voices fading as she reached for them. Her sister, Claire, visited often, bringing groceries Ilara rarely ate, trying to coax her out of the house. Friends called, their voices laced with pity she couldn't bear. She replayed those 15 minutes on the promenade deck a million times. The unimportant call, the slight delay. If only I hadn't turned my back. If only I'd been quicker. The guilt was a corrosive acid, eating away at her. Detective Thorne had meticulously gone over the ship's manifest, the passenger lists, the crew records. Background checks were run on everyone. The blind spot in the CCTV near the Kid Zone Cove remained the focal point of the mystery. Someone could have theoretically lured or taken them into that service corridor unseen. But who and how? And where could they have hidden 2 7-year-old girls on a ship under lockdown? The FBI had explored the possibility of them being taken off the ship in Nassau. But the port was chaotic, yes, but security had been heightened. Smuggling 2 children off amidst thousands of disembarking passengers, each scrutinized, seemed an almost impossible feat. Yet they were gone. One lead, that had initially seemed promising, involved a disgruntled former employee of Oceanic Voyager Cruises who had been fired months before the cruise and had made vague threats online. He was located in Miami, questioned, and eventually cleared. Another involved a passenger who had exhibited odd behavior, according to a fellow traveler. He turned out to be a socially awkward academic with no interest in children. Dead end after dead end. The changing seasons outside her window seemed to mock her static grief. Spring had turned to summer, then autumn, and now the first chill of winter was in the air. The world moved on, but Alara was trapped on that sun-drenched deck, her heart forever frozen in that moment of dawning horror. She'd started attending a support group for parents of missing children. The stories there were heartbreaking, years, sometimes decades, of not knowing. Some found a semblance of peace. Others were consumed by the abyss. Alara didn't know which path she was on. She only knew she couldn't stop searching, couldn't stop hoping, even as that hope dwindled with each passing day. One blustery November afternoon, 10 months to the day since they vanished, Alara was sorting through a box of the girl's old artwork, a task she both dreaded and felt compelled to do. She picked up a finger painting, a riot of blue and green, with 2 lopsided stick figures holding hands in the center. Lily and Iris Forever was scrawled beneath in Iris's slightly neater script. A fresh wave of grief washed over her, so potent it buckled her knees. Her phone rang, the sharp trill cutting through the silence. It was Detective Thorne. His voice, usually so measured, held a different timbre today. Tighter, more urgent. "Mrs. Vance," he began, and her heart leaped into her throat, a wild bird battering against her ribs. "Alara, I've just received a call from the Bahamian authorities, specifically from a small outpost on Serpent's Cay, one of the more remote southern islands." Serpent's Cay. She'd never heard of it. "A local fisherman," Thorne continued, his voice carefully controlled, "found something washed up on the beach this morning. A suitcase." "A suitcase?" Alara's breath hitched. "I need to warn you, Alara." Thorne's voice softened, but the underlying tension remained. "What I'm about to tell you is disturbing. The suitcase contained his remains. Human remains. Small." The room tilted. The finger painting slipped from her grasp, fluttering to the floor. Alara sank onto the edge of the sofa, her knuckles white as she gripped the phone. "Small remains. They believe," Thorne's voice was a distant hum, "they believe they might belong to one of your daughters." 10 months of echoes, of silence, of a gnawing, uncertain dread had just culminated in a single devastating sentence. One of her daughters. The fragile dam of Alara's composure, eroded by months of sorrow, finally shattered. A raw, keening sound escaped her lips, the sound of a heart breaking anew. The flight to Serpent's Cay was a blur of numb disbelief. Detective Thorne sat beside Alara, a silent, steady presence. He'd arranged everything with an efficiency that Alara, lost in a fog of renewed grief, could only dimly appreciate. Serpent's Cay, he explained, was a sparsely populated island, known more for its treacherous reefs and legendary pirate lore than for modern amenities. The local constabulary was small, and the discovery had sent ripples through the Bahamian police force. They were met at the tiny airstrip by a solemn-faced officer, Constable Roker, who drove them in a battered jeep along a dusty track towards a modest, whitewashed building that served as the island's police station and morgue. The air was thick with the scent of salt, frangipani, and something else. Something metallic and unsettling that Alara couldn't quite place. The smell of official sorrow. Inside, the air was cool, almost cold. Constable Roker introduced them to Dr. Alistair Graves, a British forensic pathologist who happened to be on a working vacation in the Bahamas and had been rerouted to Serpent's Cay to assist. He was a man in his late 50s, with tired eyes and a gentle demeanor that did little to soften the grim reality of their meeting. "Mrs. Vance," Dr. Graves began, his voice soft, "I am profoundly sorry for what you are about to face. Constable Roker will show you to the viewing room. I must warn you, the remains have been in the water for some time." Alara nodded, her throat too tight for words. Thorne placed a supportive hand on her arm. The room was small, sterile, and dimly lit. On a stainless steel gurney, covered by a sheet, lay a form that was terrifyingly small. Alara's legs threatened to buckle. Thorne's grip tightened almost imperceptibly. Dr. Graves gently pulled back the sheet. Even braced for the worst, the sight was a physical blow. The ocean had been cruel. 10 months of currents and marine life had taken their toll. But then Alara saw it. A small, faded patch of fabric, peeking from beneath the tattered remnants of what might have been clothing. It was a piece of a hand-stitched quilt square, a pattern of tiny bluebirds, part of a special blanket Iris had cherished, one Alara had made for her when she was a baby. Iris had insisted on bringing a small piece of it, tucked into her favorite shorts pocket, for good luck on the cruise. And then, nestled amongst the debris, was something else. A delicate silver locket, tarnished by the seawater on a fine chain. It was heart-shaped. Ilara had given identical lockets to Lily and Iris for their 6th birthday. Inside each, she had placed a minuscule, folded-up picture of the two of them together. That's Iris's bluebird patch," Ilara whispered, her voice cracking. "And the locket." They both had one, her gaze fixed on the locket. With trembling fingers, she reached out. Dr. Graves nodded his permission. The clasp was stiff, but she managed to pry it open. The tiny photograph inside was ruined, a blurred watercolor mess, but the locket itself was unmistakable. "The dental records will confirm, of course," Dr. Graves said gently, "but based on the clothing fragment and the locket and the estimated age from skeletal development, we believe this is your daughter Iris." Iris. Her quiet, thoughtful Iris. A sob tore through Ilara, a raw, guttural sound of unimaginable loss. Thorne guided her to a chair, his own face pale. "The cause of death, doctor?" Graves continued, giving her a moment. "Appears to be asphyxiation. There are no signs of significant trauma prior to death, no broken bones that weren't post-mortem. It suggests she likely died before entering the water. In a suitcase. The horror of it was a fresh wave of nausea. Who could do such a thing? Wrap a child in her own security blanket piece, her locket still around her neck, seal her in a tomb, and cast her into the ocean? The suitcase itself," Constable Roker interjected, his voice heavy, "is an older model. Heavy-duty canvas, reinforced corners, dark green, quite distinctive. We're trying to trace its origin, but it's unlikely. It could have been bought anywhere, years ago." Ilara's mind reeled. Iris. One of her babies, her precious girls, was gone. Murdered. But what about Lily? If Iris was here, where was Lily? The question hung in the chilled air, a terrifying counterpoint to the grief threatening to consume her. "Was there anything else?" Ilara managed, her voice raspy. "Anything at all? Any sign of her sister?" "Doctor." Graves and Constable Roker exchanged a look. "Just the one set of remains, Mrs. Vance," Roker said. "The suitcase contained only your daughter. And one other item." He gestured to an evidence bag on a nearby table. Inside, nestled on a sterile cloth, was another object, small and metallic, also tarnished. It wasn't a Zippo lighter, it was another locket. But this one was different. It was an oval, antique-looking silver locket, intricately engraved with a swirling, almost serpentine pattern. It was heavier, more ornate than the simple heart-shaped one she'd given her girls. It didn't look like something a child would own. "This was found, tangled in the fabric around your daughter," Dr. Graves explained. "It doesn't appear to match the heart-shaped locket. We wondered if you recognized it." Ilara stared at it. The design was unfamiliar, almost unsettling. "No," she said slowly. "I've never seen it before. It's not Iris's, it's not Lily's. They only had the heart lockets." Detective Thorne leaned closer, his gaze sharp. "No initials? No markings on the back?" "None that we can see yet," Dr. Graves said. "It's quite old, we think. Perhaps Victorian. We'll clean it carefully and examine it under magnification." An adult's locket, found with Iris. Why? Had it belonged to the killer? A trophy? A mistake? Later that day, after the harrowing formalities of providing a DNA sample for absolute confirmation, Ilara found herself walking along the wild, windswept beach where Iris had been found. Silas Blackwood, the fisherman who'd made the grim discovery, a weathered man with eyes as gray as the stormy sea, had quietly offered to show her the spot. "Right here, ma'am," he said, his voice raspy with emotion, pointing to a depression in the sand just above the high tide line, now marked by police tape. Tide brought her in gentle-like, as if the sea itself was grieving. Ilara knelt, letting the coarse sand run through her fingers. The vast, indifferent ocean stretched out before her, a canvas of blues and grays. It had carried her daughter's body for 10 months, a silent, cold cradle. And now it had yielded a terrible secret, and a new, perplexing clue. An ornate, serpentine locket that felt like a whisper from the abyss, a promise of more darkness yet to be uncovered. The grief for Iris was a crushing weight, but a new, fierce resolve began to burn within Ilara. Iris was gone. But Lily might still be out there. And this strange, salt-stained locket, found with her murdered child, felt like the first tangible thread in a tapestry of unimaginable evil. She would follow it, wherever it led. For Lily, and for Iris. Serpent's Cay offered little comfort beyond the raw beauty of its untamed coastline. Alara found herself in a small, clean guest house run by a kindly older woman named Martha, who clucked over her with maternal concern, offering food Alara couldn't eat and solace she couldn't accept. Detective Thorne had returned to Nassau to coordinate with the Bahamian authorities and the FBI, promising to keep Alara updated. He'd reluctantly agreed to let her stay on Serpent's Cay for a few more days, understanding her need to be near the last place Iris had been. An officer, the young and earnest Constable Myers, was assigned as a discreet shadow. Days were spent walking the beach, her eyes scanning the endless horizon, searching for, she didn't know what. Another suitcase? A message in a bottle? The sheer improbability of Iris's suitcase being found at all was a miracle wrapped in a nightmare. Lightning, she knew, rarely struck twice. She often found herself near the spot where Silas Blackwood had found Iris. He'd sometimes be there, mending his nets or simply staring out to sea, a silent sentinel. They exchanged few words, but a bond of shared sorrow formed between them. One sweltering afternoon, about a week after her arrival, Alara sat on a weathered bench overlooking the turquoise water, the ornate serpentine locket, now cleaned and photographed, but its mystery no clearer, heavy in her thoughts. She held a police photo of it in her hand. Constable Roker had told her it appeared to be silver-plated brass, likely late 19th century, mass-produced but with a distinctive design. No maker's marks. A tourist couple strolled by, the man aiming a camera at the picturesque scene. The woman, middle-aged with kind eyes, paused. "It's beautiful here, isn't it?" she offered, a tentative smile on her face. "Though I heard something terrible happened recently." Alara just nodded, unable to form words. The woman's eyes softened with understanding. "I'm so sorry," she murmured, then hesitated. "My name is Doris Chen. This is my husband, David." David lowered his camera, his expression sympathetic. They were American, perhaps on a day trip from a larger resort island. "Alara Vance," she managed, her voice hoarse. "We heard about your little girl," Doris said gently. "It's every parent's nightmare. I can't imagine." She fumbled in her beach bag. "It's not much, but we were at the little market stall by the dock. I saw this. It reminded me of something my grandmother used to have." She held out a small, intricately carved wooden bird. "For you, for her." Tears welled in Alara's eyes. Such a small gesture, yet it pierced through her numbness. "Thank you," she whispered, accepting the bird. "That's very kind." As Doris turned to go, something glinted at her throat. Alara's breath caught. It was a locket. An oval silver locket with a swirling serpentine engraving, almost identical to the one found with Iris. "Your locket," Alara said, her voice suddenly sharp, pointing. "Where did you get it?" Doris looked surprised, her hand going to her throat. "Oh, this old thing?" She unclasped it. "It was a gift from David. He picked it up on our last trip in Florida. A little antique shop, wasn't it, dear?" David nodded. "That's right. Place called the Curious Curio in Port St. Augustine, full of all sorts of interesting bric-a-brac. She collects these old pieces." Alara's heart hammered against her ribs. "Port St. Augustine?" she repeated, trying to keep her voice even. "Do you remember anything else about the shop? The owner?" "Oh, it was a quirky place," David chuckled. "Run by a rather eccentric fellow. Tall, thin, wore these old-fashioned spectacles. Arthur, I think his name was? Arthur Finch. He had a whole tray of these lockets, said he got them from an estate sale." Arthur Finch. The Curious Curio. Port St. Augustine. A tray of them. Alara showed Doris the police photo of the locket found with Iris. "Was it like this one?" Doris peered at it. "Why, yes. Very similar. The engraving is almost the same. Mine has a tiny ruby chip in the serpent's eye, see?" She pointed. "But the style is identical. Arthur said they were popular mourning lockets back in the day." Mourning lockets. The irony was a bitter pill. "Mrs. Chen," Alara said, her mind racing. "This is incredibly important. Would you be willing to speak to the police? About the locket, the shop, Mr. Finch?" The Chens looked taken aback, but readily agreed when Alara explained, in clipped, urgent tones, that an identical locket had been found with her murdered daughter. Later that evening, after the Chens had given their statement to a now very interested Constable Roker, who immediately relayed it to Detective Thorne, Alara felt the first flicker of something other than despair. It was a fragile, tentative thing. But it was there. A lead. A tangible connection. Thorne called within the hour. "Port St. Augustine," he said, his voice tight with controlled excitement. "Arthur Finch, the curious curio. We're looking into him now, Alara. Credit card records, business licenses, any priors. This could be it." There was another detail David Chen had mentioned, almost as an afterthought. He'd also bought an old, surprisingly heavy, dark green canvas travel trunk from Arthur Finch. "A real antique," David had said. "Reinforced corners. Finch gave me a good deal on it because the lock was broken. Dark green canvas, reinforced corners. Like the suitcase Iris had been found in, Alara's blood ran cold. It couldn't be a coincidence. A shop selling distinctive, antique lockets identical to one found on a murdered child. And also selling distinctive, antique trunks, similar to the one used to dispose of her body. The curious curio, and its owner, Arthur Finch, had just moved from being a quirky anecdote to the very center of a horrifying puzzle. And Alara knew with a chilling certainty that she had to go to Port St. Augustine. She had to see this shop, this man, for herself. The salt-tarnished locket had whispered a name, and now, thanks to a chance encounter on a remote beach, that whisper was becoming a shout. Port St. Augustine, Florida, was a far cry from the somber desolation of Serpents Cay. It bustled with tourists, its historic streets lined with charming boutiques and sun-drenched cafes. But for Alara Vance, the city's cheerful veneer was merely a facade hiding a potential darkness she was steeling herself to confront. Detective Thorne had flown in from Charleston to meet her, his expression grim but resolute. He'd already liaised with the Port St. Tate, Augustine PD, and a local detective, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Detective Ramirez, was now part of their ad hoc team. "Arthur Finch checks out as the owner of the Curious Curio," Thorne briefed Alara in their sterile hotel room, a map of the historic district spread on the bed. "Shop's been open about 5 years. Finch himself is 62, no criminal record, lives alone in a small bungalow on the outskirts of town, keeps to himself mostly, according to neighbors. Financials are modest. The shop isn't exactly a gold mine." "And the lockets? The trunks?" Alara asked, her voice tight. "We're treading carefully," Ramirez interjected, her dark eyes assessing Alara. "We don't want to spook him if he's involved. Plainclothes officers have done a couple of discreet walkthroughs of the shop. It's exactly as Mr. Chen described, crammed with antiques, curios, jewelry. They did spot a display case with several silver lockets, some oval, some heart-shaped. From a distance, some appeared to have similar serpentine engravings to your evidence photo. And the trunks? Nothing matching the description of the one Mr. Chen bought or the one your daughter was found in, currently on display," Thorne said. "But that doesn't mean much. He could have more in storage, or he could have sold others." The plan was for Alara, accompanied by Thorne acting as a casual acquaintance, to visit the Curious Curio. Alara's role was crucial. She was the only one who had seen the specific locket from Serpents Cay up close for an extended period. The only one who might recognize subtle nuances if Finch had others. Ramirez and her team would be nearby, observing. Walking towards the shop, located on a cobblestone side street just off the main tourist drag, Alara felt a sickening knot of anxiety and anticipation. The storefront was unassuming, its windows dusty and crammed with an eclectic mix of objects, tarnished silverware, faded portraits, chipped porcelain dolls with vacant stares. A faded wooden sign above the door read, "The Curious Curio. A. Finch, Prop." The bell above the door tinkled as they entered, announcing their arrival into a dimly lit interior that smelled of dust, old paper, and something faintly metallic like tarnished brass. The shop was a labyrinth of narrow aisles crowded with glass display cases, teetering stacks of books, and furniture draped in faded velvet. From behind a large, cluttered counter at the back, a figure emerged. Arthur Finch. He was just as David Chen had described, tall and gaunt, with thinning gray hair combed meticulously over a high forehead. He wore small, round spectacles perched on a long, thin nose, giving him an owlish, almost professorial air. His suit, though clean, was old-fashioned and slightly too large for his slender frame. "Good afternoon," he said, his voice soft, almost reedy. "May I help you find something? Or are you just browsing?" His eyes, magnified by the spectacles, flickered between Alara and Thorn. "Just looking around," Thorn said easily, his tone that of a mildly interested tourist. "My friend here," he gestured to Alara, "has a fondness for antique jewelry." Finch's gaze settled on Alara. "Ah, a connoisseur, perhaps? We have a modest collection. Some Victorian pieces, a few Art Deco." He gestured towards a glass case near the counter. Ilara's heart pounded. There, nestled on faded velvet, was a selection of silver lockets. Several were oval-shaped, their surfaces intricately engraved. Her eyes scanned them rapidly. One, then another, seemed to leap out at her. The serpentine pattern, almost identical to the one found with Iris. "These are quite unusual," Ilara managed, her voice surprisingly steady. She pointed to one of them. "This engraving, it's very distinctive." Finch leaned closer, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touching his thin lips. "Indeed, a rather popular motif in the late 19th century, often associated with eternity, or sometimes with hidden knowledge." He peered at her. "Are you perhaps looking for something specific?" My grandmother had one very much like it," Ilara improvised, the lie tasting like ash in her mouth. "It was lost years ago. I've been searching for a replacement." "Ah, sentimental value," Finch murmured. "Understandable. These pieces often carry stories, don't they?" He unlocked the case and carefully took out the locket Ilara had indicated. "This one is silver-plated, I believe. The craftsmanship is quite good for its era." Ilara took it, her fingers trembling slightly. It was nearly identical to the evidence photo, the weight, the feel. The only difference she could discern was that the serpent's eye on this one was unadorned, whereas the photo from Serpent's Cay showed a locket that, upon closer inspection after cleaning, had a tiny, almost invisible indentation where a stone might have been, or perhaps it was just a flaw in the metal. Doris Chen's had a ruby. These small variations could be key. "Do you have many of these?" she asked, feigning casual interest. "Or was this part of a specific collection you acquired?" "I came across a small lot from an estate auction up north some time ago," Finch said vaguely, waving a dismissive hand. "A lady who collected mourning jewelry, apparently. I believe I have one or two more in the back, perhaps with slight variations, different stones in the eyes sometimes, or a different clasp. Different stones in the eyes. Doris Chen's ruby. The indentation on the one from Serpent's Cay. I also recall," Ilara pressed, her gaze sweeping the cluttered shop, "a friend mentioned you sometimes have antique luggage? Old travel trunks?" Finch's eyes narrowed slightly behind his spectacles. "Luggage? Yes, occasionally, if something particularly interesting comes my way, though it's rather bulky to store. Are you in the market for a trunk as well?" "Potentially," Thorn interjected smoothly. "We're furnishing a new guest room, looking for unique pieces. I did have a rather fine canvas one. Dark green, reinforced," Finch mused, tapping a long finger against his chin. "Sold it just last month to a tourist gentleman. A pity. It was quite a find. I don't believe I have anything similar at the moment." Ilara's breath hitched. He remembered selling it. Dark green, reinforced. "Well, thank you for your time," Thorn said, placing a hand on Ilara's arm. "We'll think about the locket." As they stepped back out into the Florida sunshine, Ilara felt a chill despite the heat. Arthur Finch was calm, almost unnervingly so. But his words, the lockets, the mention of the trunk, it was all too specific, too coincidental. "He's lying," Ilara whispered to Thorn as soon as they were out of earshot. "About where he got the lockets. An estate auction up north is too vague," and he remembered the trunk too clearly. "I agree," Thorn said, his jaw tight. "He's involved. Ramirez is getting a warrant for his shop and his home, based on what we've seen and his statements matching the Chen's testimony and the specificity of the items linking to Iris's case. We need to see what's in his back room, what's in his house." The Curious Curio was no longer just a quirky antique shop. It was a facade, and behind it, Ilara sensed, lay a darkness far more terrifying than she could have imagined. Arthur Finch, the softly spoken proprietor, was a gatekeeper to a secret, and she was certain that secret involved the fate of her daughters. The warrant took 12 agonizing hours to secure. 12 hours during which Ilara paced her hotel room like a caged animal, while Thorne and Ramirez coordinated with a local judge and prepared their teams. Surveillance on the Curious Curio and Arthur Finch's bungalow continued, discreet but constant. Finch followed his usual routine, opened the shop, served a few customers, closed up at dusk, and drove his unremarkable sedan home. There was no sign of panic, no deviation from his norm. It was unsettlingly calm. Finally, late the next morning, the warrant came through. 2 teams were assembled, one for the shop, led by Ramirez, and one for Finch's home, led by Thorne, with Ilara accompanying him, a decision Thorne had made after seeing the steel in her eyes. She wouldn't be involved in the direct search, but her presence, her ability to identify items related to her daughters, was deemed potentially crucial. Finch's bungalow was a small, neatly kept clapboard house on a quiet, tree-lined street. It looked utterly ordinary, the kind of place an elderly, solitary man might live. As Thorne's team, clad in raid vests, approached the front door, Ilara's heart hammered. This was it, the moment of truth, or another agonizing dead end. Thorne knocked, loud and firm. "Mr. Finch, police, we have a warrant to search these premises." Silence. Then, a shuffling sound from within. The door opened a crack, and Arthur Finch peered out, his face pale, his spectacles slightly askew. He looked more frail, more bewildered than he had in the shop. "A warrant? Whatever for, detective?" he asked, his reedy voice trembling slightly. Thorne presented the document. Finch read it slowly, his hand shaking. He offered no resistance as the team fanned out through the small house. Ilara remained with Thorne near the entrance, her eyes scanning every detail. The house was as cluttered as the shop, filled with antiques, stacks of old books and curios. But there was a difference here. It felt less like a collection and more like a hoard. Dust lay thick on many surfaces, and a faint, musty odor permeated the air. The search was methodical. Bedrooms, bathroom, kitchen. Closets were emptied, drawers pulled out. Every item was scrutinized. For Ilara, it was agonizing. She saw nothing that immediately screamed Lily or Iris. Just the strange, oppressive belongings of an eccentric old man. Then, from a small locked office at the back of the house, one of the officers called out, "Detective, you need to see this." The office was Finch's inner sanctum. Unlike the rest of the house, it was meticulously organized. Bookshelves lined one wall, filled with ledgers and files. A large desk dominated the center, an old-fashioned computer monitor glowing on its surface, and in a locked filing cabinet they found them. Photographs. Hundreds of them. Not of Lily and Iris, but of other children. Dozens of different children, some appearing as young as 5 or 6, others perhaps early teens. They were posed, sometimes in old-fashioned clothing, sometimes in unsettlingly staged scenes. None were explicitly illegal in the most graphic sense, but they were deeply disturbing, with an undercurrent of exploitation that made Ilara's stomach churn. They looked like something from a dark, twisted Victorian storybook. "What is this?" Thorne breathed, his face hardening. "Is this what he sells? These images?" On Finch's computer, forensic techs began uncovering more. Encrypted files, hidden folders, and a detailed ledger. It wasn't just images. It was names, first names or nicknames, ages, physical descriptions, and dates. Dates that corresponded with entries in financial ledgers also found in the office, showing payments from various accounts, some overseas. "He's a collector," one of the techs muttered. "And a distributor." Ilara felt sick. These were other people's children, lost, exploited. Her hope for finding Lily here, in this house of horrors, began to wither. If Finch was involved with this, what hope was there for her daughter? Simultaneously, Ramirez's team was searching the Curious Curio. The back room, as Finch had alluded, did contain a few more lockets, some with different tiny stones, others plain. But it also yielded something else. A hidden compartment beneath a loose floorboard. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, was a small collection of children's clothing, old-fashioned dresses, sailor suits, bonnets, and a small, worn leather child's shoe. Ramirez called Thorne. "We found clothes and a single shoe. Looks like it's for a child around 6 or 7. Could be a prop for his photos or something more sinister. But still, no direct sign of Lily or Iris. No yellow sundresses, no familiar toys." As the search at Finch's house wound down, yielding a mountain of disturbing but, for Alara, frustratingly indirect evidence, Finch himself remained impassive, sitting silently in his living room under guard. He'd requested a lawyer, who was now en route. Alara felt a crushing despair. They had Finch, they had his grotesque collection, but they didn't have Lily. "His car," Thorne said suddenly, looking out the window at Finch's sedan parked in the driveway. "We need to toss it thoroughly, and check the plates, run its history, any long trips." The car was searched. In the trunk, beneath the spare tire, they found a small, cheap plastic doll, its hair matted, one eye missing, and a child's brightly colored hair clip, a small plastic butterfly. Alara didn't recognize them specifically, but they were undeniably items for a young girl. The license plate, an officer noted, reading it out, DBF7KE Standard Florida issue. "K," Alara whispered. The initials on the original Zippo lighter from the YouTube story she'd watched, the one that started this whole mental exercise of reimagining. But here, in this story, the locket was the clue. Still, initials could be significant. Thorne made a note. Could be nothing. Could be something. He looked at Alara, his expression one of deep frustration mixed with a grim determination. "He's not working alone, Alara. This is too organized. The ledgers, the payments. There's a network." As evening approached, Finch's lawyer arrived. Finch remained tight-lipped. The evidence against him for possession and distribution of exploitative material was strong, but there was still no concrete link to the twins' disappearance or Iris's murder, beyond the circumstantial lockets and the vague similarity of the trunk. "We keep digging," Thorne said, his voice gravelly with fatigue. "We analyze every piece of data from his computer, every name in those ledgers. We trace those financial transactions. Someone, somewhere, knows something about your girls." Just then, Ramirez called again, her voice urgent. "Thorne, you won't believe this. One of my guys was reviewing Finch's recent credit card statements. 3 days ago, a charge for a round-trip ferry ticket. Port St. Augustine to Freeport, Grand Bahama. Departing tomorrow morning. 1 adult, 1 child. Freeport, not Serpent's Cay, but another Bahamian island. 1 adult, 1 child." A cold dread, mixed with a wild, desperate hope, seized Alara. "A child," she breathed. Is he planning to leave? With a child?" "It looks like it," Thorne said, his eyes locking with Alara's. "He hasn't canceled the ticket. If he's got another child hidden somewhere, or if he was planning to meet someone, tomorrow morning's ferry is our best chance to catch him in the act, or find out who he's meeting." The quiet street outside Finch's bungalow was now bathed in the flashing lights of police vehicles. Arthur Finch was being led out in handcuffs, his face impassive. But Alara's attention was already elsewhere, racing ahead to the ferry terminal, to a boat departing for the Bahamas, with a child. Could it be Lily? After all this time, after so much darkness, could this be the glimmer of light she had so desperately prayed for? Or was it another false dawn in her unending nightmare? The Port St. Augustine ferry terminal was a hive of activity in the cool pre-dawn light. Tourists laden with luggage, locals commuting, and commercial vehicles lined up for the early morning departure to Freeport. Alara, Thorne, and Ramirez, along with a discreet team of plainclothes officers, had been in position since before sunrise, their eyes scanning every vehicle, every face. The tension was a palpable thing, coiling in Alara's stomach like a venomous snake. Arthur Finch was in custody, but the ferry ticket remained active. Their theory was that Finch had an accomplice, someone who would proceed with the plan, perhaps unaware of Finch's arrest, or perhaps attempting to flee. The child on the ticket was their primary focus. "There," Thorne murmured, his gaze fixed on a dark blue SUV inching forward in the boarding line. "Florida plates, Kilo Echo initials in the middle. KE matches the partial we saw on a sticky note on Finch's desk. Looked like a reminder, KE ferry pickup." Alara's breath caught. K.E. The initials from the lighter in the original story's transcript, though here it was just a fleeting detail on a note, but the context was chilling. The SUV had tinted windows, making it impossible to see clearly inside. As it drew closer to the ticket checkpoint, Ilara's heart hammered against her ribs. This had to be it. "Ramirez, your team ready?" Thorne spoke softly into his radio. "Affirmative. We have eyes on all exits. If they bolt, we're on them." The SUV stopped. The driver's window rolled down. A woman was driving. Mid-40s, sharp features, blonde hair pulled back severely. She handed tickets to the attendant. Ilara strained to see into the back. Through the tinted glass, she caught a fleeting glimpse. A small figure, a child, head down, a mass of dark hair. "It could be anyone," Thorne cautioned, his hand on Ilara's arm. But Ilara's maternal instinct, honed by months of agonizing loss and desperate hope, screamed otherwise. Something about the slump of the child's shoulders, the way her hair fell. "That's her," Ilara whispered, her voice trembling. "I know it. That's Lily." As if sensing their scrutiny, the woman driver glanced nervously towards them, then spoke urgently into a hands-free device. Suddenly, the SUV's passenger door flew open. A man, burly and grim-faced, jumped out, yanked open the rear door and pulled the child out. The child stumbled, looking terrified. It was Lily. Thinner, her face pale and smudged, her dark hair lank, but unmistakably Lily. "Police! Stop right there!" Thorne bellowed, already moving, his weapon drawn but pointed downwards. Officers converged. The woman driver slammed the SUV into park and jumped out, shouting, "Run! Go!" The burly man shoved Lily towards the woman, then turned to confront the approaching officers, buying them time. The woman grabbed Lily's arm, dragging the struggling child towards the crowded passenger terminal, clearly intending to lose themselves in the throng. "Lily!" Ilara screamed, breaking free from Thorne's restraining hold, raw adrenaline coursing through her veins. She sprinted towards her daughter, dodging startled tourists and rolling suitcases. The scene erupted into controlled chaos. Ferry horns blared, people shouted, uniformed port police joined the pursuit. The burly man was quickly subdued by Thorne and two other officers after a brief, violent struggle. But the woman, desperation etched on her face, was nimble, weaving through the crowd. Lily, a terrified captive at her side. Ilara, fueled by a mother's fierce love, closed the distance. She saw Lily's face, streaked with tears, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and dawning recognition. "Mommy?" Lily cried, her small voice nearly lost in the cacophony. "I'm here, baby, I'm here," Ilara shouted, her own tears blinding her. Ramirez and another officer cut off the woman's escape route towards the main terminal doors. Cornered, the woman spun around, her eyes wild. She still had a death grip on Lily's arm. "Let the girl go," Ramirez commanded, her gun trained on the woman. For a heart-stopping moment, the woman hesitated, her chest heaving. Then with a snarl she released Lily, giving her a rough shove towards Ilara. The child stumbled, and Ilara was there, dropping to her knees, enveloping Lily in a fierce embrace, shielding her with her own body. My baby," Ilara sobbed, rocking Lily back and forth, oblivious to everything but the feel of her daughter, alive and trembling, in her arms. Lily clung to her, her small body racked with sobs, her face buried in Ilara's shoulder. The woman, later identified as Evelyn Reed, was cuffed and read her rights. The burly man was Marcus Mac Brewer, a known associate of Finch, with a record for petty crimes. Thorne knelt beside Ilara and Lily, his face a mixture of relief and professional concern. "We've got them, Ilara. She's safe." He gently touched Lily's hair. "We need to get her checked out by paramedics, and we need to talk to her when she's ready." Lily looked up at Thorne, her eyes huge and haunted in her small, pale face. She was so thin, her sunshine-yellow sundress from 10 months ago replaced by ill-fitting drab clothes. But she was alive. She was here. "The bad man," Lily whispered, her voice hoarse, clinging tighter to Ilara. He said Iris went to sleep with the fishes." Ilara's heart shattered anew, even amidst the overwhelming relief. She held Lily tighter, pressing a kiss to her hair. "Iris is an angel now, sweetheart," she choked out. "But you're safe. You're safe with Mommy now." The ferry terminal, a place of transit and farewells, had become the scene of an improbable, miraculous reunion. As paramedics gently examined Lily, Alara held her hand, their fingers intertwined, a lifeline reforged in the crucible of unimaginable horror. The salt-stained locket had led them through a labyrinth of darkness, and now, finally, it had led her back to one of her lost stars. The fight was far from over, but for the first time in 10 agonizing months, Alara Vance felt a flicker of genuine, unadulterated hope illuminate the abyss. The hours following Lily's rescue were a whirlwind of medical checks, hushed police consultations, and Alara's unwavering presence at her daughter's side. Lily was admitted to a private room at Port St. Augustine General Hospital, a frightened bird clinging to Alara's hand as if terrified she might vanish again. Physically, she was malnourished, dehydrated, and bore several faded bruises on her arms and back, evidence of restraints or rough handling. Psychologically, the scars ran far deeper. She startled at loud noises, recoiled from unfamiliar male voices, and often dissolved into tears for no apparent reason, murmuring about the dark room and scary pictures. Arthur Finch, Evelyn Reed, and Marcus Brewer were interrogated separately. Finch, initially stoic, began to crack when confronted with the likelihood of spending the rest of his life in prison and the damning evidence from his house and shop. Evelyn Reed, facing her own grim future, proved more forthcoming, hoping for a deal. Brewer, the muscle, was loyal to Finch, but his story had holes. Slowly, painstakingly, the horrifying truth began to emerge, pieced together from their confessions and the evidence. Detective Thorne and Detective Ramirez briefed Alara in a small, sterile hospital waiting room, their faces grim. "Finch was the architect," Thorne began, his voice low. "He's been running a clandestine operation for years, catering to a select wealthy clientele with a taste for artistic and vintage-style images of children. Not overtly pornographic in the traditional sense, but deeply exploitative, fetishistic. He sourced the children, staged the photo shoots, and distributed the images through encrypted channels." Alara felt bile rise in her throat. "Sourced them? You mean he kidnapped them?" "Sometimes," Ramirez said. "Other times, he preyed on vulnerable families, runaways. He had a network of spotters. Evelyn Reed was one of them. She worked as a part-time children's party entertainer. That's how she first saw Lily and Iris at a birthday party in Charleston nearly a year before the cruise. She noted their identical appearance, their outgoing nature, and passed the information to Finch. The cruise had been Finch's elaborate plan. He wasn't a passenger. He'd used a stolen and expertly falsified crew ID and uniform, a maintenance worker, to gain access to the Azure Dreamer when it was docked in Charleston prior to its departure. He knew the ship's layout, the CCTV blind spots. He'd even managed to temporarily disable a small section of cameras near the Kid Zone Cove using a sophisticated electronic jammer for a critical 10-minute window. "The magician, Rico, was an unwitting pawn," Thorne continued. Finch observed him, saw how the children were captivated. He approached Lily and Iris after Rico left, performing a similar simple sleight-of-hand trick he'd practiced, luring them towards that service corridor with the promise of more magic. Once in the corridor, he'd subdued them quickly and quietly using a fast-acting sedative spray. He'd hidden them in a large, wheeled maintenance cart covered with tarps and cleaning supplies and moved them to an unused storage locker he'd identified beforehand. "But why Iris?" Alara choked out, the name a fresh stab of pain. "Why kill her?" "That's where it gets even more monstrous," Thorne said, his jaw tight. Finch's original client for this particular acquisition had specified a preference for a single child, finding twins too complicated for his narrative. When Finch presented both, the client backed out of the immediate deal but offered a smaller sum for one, with potential for the other later. Finch, pragmatic and cruel, decided Iris was slightly more difficult, more questioning. He asphyxiated her in that storage locker. No struggle, no noise. He then placed her in that antique trunk, one he'd brought aboard in pieces and assembled, along with her locket and the patch, a sick kind of memento, perhaps. The other, serpentine locket, was his own good luck charm that must have fallen in accidentally. He'd disposed of the trunk overboard late that night from a rarely used service deck, weighted, he thought, sufficiently. Clearly, he miscalculated. And Lily? Ilara whispered, her gaze drifting to the closed door of Lily's hospital room. He kept Lily sedated in the locker until Nassau, Ramirez explained. Disembarkation was chaotic. He dressed her in different drab clothes, put a wig on her, and used oversized sunglasses. He carried a fake doctor's note saying she was recovering from a contagious illness and needed minimal interaction. He wheeled her off in a collapsible wheelchair, hidden amongst a large group of departing families, his falsified crew ID getting him through initial checkpoints before he melted into the crowd. From Nassau, Finch and Reed, with Brewer's occasional help, had moved Lily between a series of rented apartments and secluded properties in the Bahamas and Florida, including a remote cabin on Cedar Key, where many of the disturbing photographs were taken. The curious curio was Finch's legitimate front, allowing him to move money and occasionally meet with associates. The ferry trip to Freeport was intended to move Lily to a new, more secure location, as Finch felt their current Florida setup was becoming compromised after some close calls with neighbors. Reed was tasked with transporting Lily, meeting another operative in Freeport, as Finch himself was due to attend a collector's fair in Europe. The KE on that note, Thorne clarified, stood for Key Egress, Finch's shorthand for the Cedar Key property and Evelyn Reed's involvement in moving Lily from there. The scope of Finch's network was still being unraveled. The ledgers and computer files pointed to dozens of other children over the years and a handful of core accomplices, including photographers, handlers like Reed, and international buyers. Arrests were already being made in several states and were anticipated overseas. Ilara listened, a cold rage building beneath her grief and relief. These weren't just monsters. They were meticulous, organized predators who had built an empire on the stolen innocence of children. Lily mentioned scary pictures, Ilara said, her voice trembling, and a dark room. We found a makeshift studio at the Cedar Key property, Ramirez confirmed, her expression pained. Consistent with what we found in Finch's house, Lily was clearly one of his models. The weight of it all was crushing. Her beautiful, vibrant Iris, murdered by this depraved old man. Her precious Lily, subjected to unimaginable horrors for 10 months. Later, when Lily was asleep, sedated lightly to help her rest, Ilara sat by her bed, stroking her daughter's hair. She noticed a small, almost invisible scar near Lily's temple, a tiny crescent moon she hadn't seen before. Another mark of her ordeal. A child psychologist, Dr. Evans, had spoken to Ilara earlier, outlining the long road ahead. PTSD, anxiety, trust issues. Lily would need intensive therapy, patience, and unconditional love. She's resilient, Dr. Evans had said. Children are. But this kind of trauma leaves indelible marks. Her recovery will be a marathon, not a sprint. Ilara knew it. But looking at Lily's sleeping face, the way her small hand instinctively gripped hers even in sleep, she felt a surge of fierce, protective love that eclipsed even her profound grief. They had unmasked the monsters. Justice would follow, however imperfect. But her most important task now was to help Lily find her way back from the darkness, to piece together the shattered fragments of her childhood, and to build a new life on the foundations of a love that had, against all odds, brought one of her daughters home. The weeks that followed were a delicate dance between confronting the horrors of the past and tentatively stepping towards an uncertain future. Lily remained hospitalized for over a week, her physical strength slowly returning under careful medical supervision. Ilara never left her side, sleeping in a cot by her bed, a constant, reassuring presence. The legal machine ground relentlessly on. Arthur Finch, Evelyn Reed, and Marcus Brewer were charged with a litany of crimes, including kidnapping, child endangerment, conspiracy, and, for Finch, the murder of Iris Vance. Faced with overwhelming evidence and Reed's detailed confession, Finch's defense crumbled. The broader investigation into his network, dubbed Operation Curious by the FBI, led to arrests across 3 continents. The sheer scale of the depravity was staggering, a dark underbelly of society Ilara had never known existed. Lily began therapy with Dr. Evans while still in the hospital. The sessions were difficult. Sometimes Lily would talk, her small voice recounting fragmented memories, the scary man with the glasses, the cold, dark rooms, the flash of the camera, the constant fear. Other times, she would retreat into silence, her eyes wide and haunted. Nightmares were frequent, often leaving her screaming for Ilara, for Iris. The day they finally left Port St. Augustine, flying back to Charleston on a private jet arranged by the FBI, was bittersweet. Returning home without Iris was an agony. Ilara could barely comprehend. Yet, holding Lily's small hand, she knew she had to be strong. The house in Charleston felt alien to Lily. The bright, cheerful bedroom she had once shared with her twin was now a source of both comfort and pain. She would often stand before Iris's empty bed, her expression unreadable, before crawling into Ilara's bed at night. Detective Thorne remained a quiet pillar of support. He visited regularly, not just with case updates, but sometimes just to see how they were doing. He understood, in a way few others could, the strange twilight world they now inhabited, a world of profound loss interwoven with miraculous reunion. There was a memorial service for Iris. A small private affair attended by close family and friends. Ilara spoke, her voice trembling but clear, of Iris's bright spirit, her kindness, her love for bluebirds. Lily sat beside her, clutching a small, carved wooden bird, the one Doris Chen had given Ilara on Serpent's Cay. It had become one of Lily's treasures. The media, once again, descended. Ilara, fiercely protective of Lily's privacy, issued a single statement through her lawyer, thanking the authorities and asking for space to heal. She knew Lily's story, and Iris's would become a cautionary tale, a headline, but to her, they were her life, her heart. Slowly, incrementally, Lily began to reclaim small pieces of herself. She started drawing again, first dark, scribbled images, then, gradually, splashes of color. She asked to visit the local animal shelter, and a small, fluffy kitten named Sunshine became a new, comforting presence in their home. Laughter, tentative at first, began to bubble up more frequently. The legal process was arduous. Ilara attended every court hearing she could, a silent, steely presence representing the devastation Finch and his accomplices had wrought. Seeing Finch in the courtroom, his owlish face impassive, still ignited a cold fury within her. But she focused that anger into a resolve to see justice done, not just for Iris and Lily, but for all the other unnamed children whose lives his darkness had touched. Months turned into a year. Lily started school again, with a dedicated aide and a supportive teacher who understood her needs. There were good days and bad days. Days when the shadows of her captivity would cloud her eyes, and days when she would run and play with a carefree abandon that brought tears to Ilara's eyes. The serpentine locket, the accidental clue that had unraveled Finch's monstrous world, sat in an evidence locker, its role in the drama complete. Ilara sometimes thought of it, a small, tarnished object that had connected a mother's desperate search to an unimaginable evil and ultimately to a miraculous rescue. One cool autumn evening, more than a year after Lily's return, they sat on their porch swing, watching the leaves fall. Lily, snuggled close to Ilara, was reading aloud from a new library book, her voice growing stronger, more confident. "Mommy," she said, pausing, "do you think Iris can see us, from where the angels live?" Ilara hugged her tight, pressing a kiss to her hair. "I know she can, sweetheart, and I know she's so proud of how brave you are." Lily smiled, a genuine, bright smile that reached her eyes. "I miss her, but it's good to be home." "It's good to have you home, my love," Ilara whispered, her own eyes wet. The road ahead was still long. The scars, both visible and invisible, would always remain. But looking at her daughter, her resilient, courageous Lily, Ilara knew they would navigate it together. The darkest night had passed, and though the dawn was tinged with sorrow, it was also illuminated by an unquenchable love and the quiet, persistent promise of healing. The echoes of laughter in their Charleston home were slowly, tentatively, beginning to return.